This is Rugby Unity. I am David Pembroke, and welcome to a special edition of Rugby Unity. Eddie Jones is not joining me today, but a very dear friend and an old friend is joining me, and it's Dr. Brett Robinson, the new chairman of World Rugby. Brett Robinson, welcome to Rugby Unity.
It is an absolute pleasure to be here with you, Pemby. As you say, old and golden friends, known each other for 30 years, and we had a wonderful celebration yesterday of the retirement of another dear friend of ours, Phil Thompson, after 30 years of contribution to the game as an administrator, as a Wallaby team manager, as a Brumbies team manager, and it was a lovely celebration of rugby in this great city.
Yeah, it certainly was. So perhaps we might just set the table a little for people, because the story starts for me at least, late 1995, when I was sitting up in the Federal Parliamentary Press Gallery working as a reporter for ABC Radio Current Affairs, when an old coach of mine rang, a guy by the name of Rod McQueen, and he told me that he was coming to Canberra to start a new rugby team, and he asked me if I'd like to get involved. And I said at the time, I was focused on politics, not so much focused on rugby. But Rod sent me the plan, and I read it and I thought, yep, this looks like it'll be fun. And so I joined the team as an advisor to Rod, and I didn't know any of the players. I really wasn't connected to the game at that time. But it was a wonderful time for us, wasn't it? That, young men like yourself came to the team. And we started on a journey where we were set out to be the best provincial rugby union team in the world. And you and your dear wife, Amelia, we became close friends. And as you say, 30 years on, here we are. You're the chairman of World Rugby.
Yeah,
I'm hosting the Rugby Unity podcast, where we're trying to help secure the future prosperity of rugby union around the world. But it's been a journey, and I think this won't be the last conversation that we have over the coming weeks, months and years, because I think part of the motivation of starting Rugby Unity is obviously, through our association and me thinking, well, how can we create content in such a way that supports the strategic direction of the sport? So I'm excited to develop Rugby Unity, and I do hope that we see it as a real positive vehicle to promote the sport, to celebrate the sport, and really to help us to realise our potential, which is significant.
Yeah. And look, Rod's a great symbol of that, isn't he? So you go back to, I first met Rod when he coached me in the Australia A side that played against Ireland in Mount Isa. That was the first time I met him in 1995 and captained that side, and we beat Ireland by 50 points, I think, in Mount Isa. And I was rooming with Willie Offen-Gateway, the great Tongan back rower who got a head knock in the game. So I spent the night looking after him while the rest of the team went out to the local establishments and had a good night. But it was a wonderful time to meet Rod. And Rod sort of taught me a lot, and us a lot, about the power of purpose and vision. And he set and established expectations about what was possible. And I've learned a lot from him as a leader, and carried a lot of those lessons through my life about, to the point of what you've established here. And when you really elevate your thinking and put out broad, elevated, lofty ambition, what's really possible. Because that team at the time, as you remember, when it was put together at the end of 95, the start of professional rugby, and it was established to strengthen rugby in Australia, its contribution to Wallabies, administrators, coaches, but which was a wonderful ambition. And I guess it elevated our thinking as to what we were there to do as a team. And in looking back on that, what actually happened and what was delivered to this day is extraordinary in terms of the contribution to, numbers of Wallabies, Wallaby captains, World Cup wins, Lions wins, championships,
Tri-Nations,
coaches, administrators, chairman.
But it's even beyond that, isn't it? When you think of the influence of Eddie Jones, of David Nusafora in Northern Hemisphere rugby, that it's gone far and wide, and the fact that you are now elected chairman of World Rugby, that has all come out of this one little team in this one little town at the bottom of the world.
Yeah. Well, I guess the thing that we were all inspired about the opportunity that was in front of us, and that And I think one of the foundational pieces of our culture was that it was never about an individual, it was always about us as a collective, and that if we focus on that, anything was possible for the individuals involved. And many of us outperformed to our wildest dreams as to what was possible, both on and off the field. And I think, and I guess all of that also built confidence and belief and culture in people that to this day, right around the world, there are people from that time that have gone on to do wonderful things, both in rugby and outside of rugby.
I think, that cultural element, I think that high performance culture, but also, the real foundations of the rugby values that sat inside the Brumbies, that I think it really helped the organisation to grow, because it stayed true to rugby's values, but also Brumbies' values as well. And as you say, from a high performance point of view, you need culture. And I think collectively, I think that's an opportunity globally that we need to do more with, about that great culture, to really strengthen the foundations of the sport so as that we can, realise our potential. Because I think, would you agree at the moment that we're not realising our potential as the great game that we are?
Yeah, look, I think there's just so much opportunity in front of the sport, and I think there's so much good to talk about and to focus in on around opportunity, and not to allow ourselves to be sort of dragged into the negative sentiment and the bashing of the game that can occur, because, certainly from my experience and now and the great privilege of having this role, there is so much ahead of us as a sport and across multiple different elements of the game. And, you called it out in the deep sense of competitive advantage we have around our values. So that globally, this is a game that, there's a lovely lady on the council from Italy who talks about the third half. She describes that there's the first and second halves of the game, and then there's what's beyond, off the field, in terms of celebrating, enjoying the people, but also the life that rugby creates for you professionally and personally. That is a real competitive edge for our sport when I look at other sports around the world. And also, we are truly an international game as well, that those values translate across the world. So it's not compartmentalised from a geographic perspective, but those values are deeply rooted, whether you're in Uruguay, or whether you're here in Canberra, or you might be in Port Elizabeth, or as my son Tom is at the moment, in northern Italy.
Yeah, exactly. And it is massively powerful. And I think there is that advantage that we do have, that we are a well-established global sport at a time where technology is shrinking the world. Yeah. It's connecting it's up more easily than we've ever been able to be connected in the past. Already, Rugby Unity's only been running now for a little under, or maybe a little over 2 months, and we've already, we're getting multiple thousands of downloads every week. The last count was about 73 countries where people are tuned in to this mission of how do we help secure the future prosperity of rugby union around the world. And that global footprint, I think, is a massive advantage that we need to continue to think about how we're going to capitalise on it. Because when you look at the growth strategies of the big North American sports, the NFL, the MLB, the NBA, they're all trying to get out of North America and they're trying to expand globally. So they're trying to come to where we already are. And I think that's something that we need to sort of continue to understand, that we do have this global footprint. But for mine, and again, just in these few short weeks that we've been working on this program, I think that connectivity piece, the joining up, is really part of where we need to start. We need to sort of think about our foundations and how do we better join ourselves up so as that we realise the potential of what we've got. Then once we get that foundation in place, that's when we can start to grow and look for innovation and further change. But it really, I think, just starting with connecting up North and South America, connecting up Northern Hemisphere and Southern Hemisphere, that will just realise a great gain to start with. Because at the moment, I just don't think we're quite there.
No, we're not, Pemby, but I tell you, that's the opportunity. So I'm 6 months in the role now. So, part of my election promise was we would go through a 6 to 9 month process of actually reflecting on where to from here. And we kicked that off with a board meeting here in Australia at the Perth Sevens, with the first board meeting under the newly elected board held here We then we had a shape of the game meeting in London a few weeks later to talk about the product, which broadly I think we can talk about is in a much better place than it was a couple of years ago. We then came together in Hong Kong as a board and spoke about the priorities that we believed we needed to present and talk to the world about in our May Council meeting, where we presented, I guess, what was the first iteration of the strategic plan for the next 4 to 7 years. And in September at the Women's World Cup, we're going to go back and look for a united view and a connected view about that plan. And your point is so right, because World Rugby for many years, it's got this core reason for being. Its purpose, World Rugby, is to provide regulation, law change, international calendar, run massive, wonderful global events like Rugby World Cups, men's and women's, under-20s, sevens events, to invest in key elements of growth like women's and in safety and welfare. But we have, I guess, this sort of vision that I have that I need to bring to bear as we finalise in the next 4 or 5 years about the role World Rugby has to fuel the game. So we're a power source of the game in terms of the money we're able to generate of World Cups, and where we put that money is critical. So fueling the game and its growth is really important. But we have a massive role in unification of the sport as well. So that there is so much, as we all know, in great teams, when you come together and you pull together and you're cohesive and you step forward together, anything's possible. So I think there is, in the next 5 years, we need to be a unified sport, much more unified than we have been. We need to separate these factional and geographic divides and get on and come together. And the other final piece that we have as a driver for the next 5 years is to change lives, because rugby changes lives. It changes lives of young men and women every day. You know, we were there last night. You know, farewelling Phil, and Patricio Noriega was there, the great Parto, the great Argentinian front rower. And I'll never forget Parto being presented to us at our very first camp at Jindabyne back in the end of 95, 96, as this guy that had packed up his life, moved his family, his 4 children, didn't speak a breath of English, to Australia to play rugby. And here he is 30 years later with all of his beautiful family here. And it's changed his life. He played for 2 countries. He went to World Cups. And here he is, this beautiful man, with his family and grandchildren now, here in Canberra still. But it changed his life. And I think that's the other power of the values of our sport, but the nature of our sport too, can have that impact of people that could have taken a left, but they've taken a right because of the rugby game.
So really a key part of your role is almost, communicator in chief, isn't it? You really have to define that story and then tell it again and again and again so as that we can unify ourselves and link with each other so as that we can realise some of that potential. Because one example I'll give you is that the Six Nations, I think, is clearly the premier annual tournament in our game, and this year was superb. But we don't celebrate it in the South as much as we should. It's not in the newspapers, it's not on the television, it's not on the radio, and we need to do better. So, for example, I believe Rugby Australia should do much more to promote the Six Nations and what's going on about it, and we should be thinking much more about it. We should be talking about it. We should be getting up in the middle of the night and watching it and really making it a part. But then again, when the Rugby Championship is on, again, in the North, they should be putting more focus on the Rugby Championship. So, because through that, we can then build some of these global stars in our game, both men's and women's.
Well, Pemby, we're right on the precipice. So the Nations Cup is just that. So, in the week before the last Lions test in Sydney, where myself and Alan Gilpin have been invited on to the steering committee of the Nations Cup, and we're coming to the pointy end of landing on that tournament, which is effectively an annual connection of Six Nations to Rugby Championship to a final series, and having meaning in all of that across a 12-month period and connecting the game globally, introducing the Fijians and the Japanese into that model. It's a massive shift for our sport. It's strategically one of the most important things we've been discussing for many years. It's a shame it's taken so long, because we obviously, at a World Rugby level, were really keen to have got this away in the last cycle. But, having had the 2023 Council approve the opening up of more time to play a final series in November through Reg 9, we now have the opportunity to pull a fully integrated, connected season that doesn't take away from the purity and the sanctity of the Six Nations or the Rugby Championship, but it connects it all up together. It means that June and July, so the inbounds and the outbound windows become meaningful finally. Not that a test match isn't meaningful, but ultimately for a fan.
No, but it's a context. It wraps it in it's a different wrapper.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing, as you say, but won't it be great, when the final is being played of the Nations Cup and it's the teams, playing to be the best team in the world that year?
Yeah.
It'd be just superb.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's, we don't move at a pace sometimes in rugby, which is disappointing, and we need to be able to move faster than we do.
How do you do that though? Because this is again one of the other things when you look at the leading sports, like the NFL. And now it's much easier. The NFL is an absolute beast, but it's owned by the 32 owners of the clubs, and they can get together and make a decision overnight. And over a weekend.
Rugby league's the same.
Rugby league, AFL's the same. They can do that. Now, rugby can't do that because of its governance. But how can it move faster?
Well, I think unification around a plan's a start. So when we head into September, one of the big pieces of the strategic plan. So we're going to be debating about investment, so choices, so the fueling of the game piece that World Rugby has a responsibility for. We have distributions to the members, so we have a responsibility to distribute large chunks of money, and that's about £300 million of the 470 we had from the Rugby World Cup in France. But it's the discretionary spend as well. It's the choices we make about safety and welfare, about women's game, about sevens, but also for our look forward to 31 and 33 about how do we unite the world about the opportunity to grow the game in North America and across Americas. And the plan that we're building with the CEOs of the top 12 unions right now is to go to that September council meeting with a commitment from everybody to be participating in that is linked to opportunity and financial outcome and incentivisation, but also ultimately to building and growing a market and a footprint commercially for many, many others to participate in the medium to longer term. And that's coming through collaboration, connection, respect, communication, trust, leveraging IP and connection, incentivisation. So there's a whole model that's being pulled together that hopefully will bring people together. But it all comes down to the process of unity. That sense of unity, elevation, putting self-interest aside for a second, because ultimately it is going to be better for you if you do give up some things sometimes. My role is, as you've said, is to build trust and relationship so that we can get to that point where we then commit.
Because we on Rugby Unity talk about this idea of how do we when do we collaborate, when do we compete?
Yeah.
Now, collaboration to me is most of the time, and when we compete is when we cross the white line and get stuck in, have a game, but then start to be thinking straight away, well, how can we work together? Where are those benefits? How do we realise those benefits to generate more revenue into the game? Because your first agenda item once you were elected was around securing the financial sustainability of the member unions.
That's right.
Up front, number one, because at the moment, clearly, there's not enough money in the game to be able to fund everything that you want to do. But World Rugby can do what World Rugby can do, but its member unions obviously have a responsibility around the generation of funding. So are you confident that there is that goodwill that people can see and that we're now moving to a point of collaboration and cooperation that perhaps we haven't seen in the past?
Yeah, look, I certainly feel that coming out of the May council meeting, when we had all the members there and the unions there over a week, we are in a much better place. And we spent the first 2 days of that May meeting talking about the financial sustainability issues of the game. We spoke broadly about the challenges of regulation, player movement, player salaries, wage inflation. We looked at other sports, other sporting models, other case studies of where things have failed and why, and what learnings is that for us for rugby. And there was an absolute understanding that we need to consider what are the elements of that is consistent and relevant in our sport, because it's not the same necessarily everywhere. And then we also looked at, so it was cost and revenue, and then we also looked at revenue opportunities about collaborating around, the America's Growth Plan, about, finalisation of the Nations Cup, about, sort of key elements of revenue that we could leverage. There are other things that are technology enabled about how can we work together through Rugby Pass, the platform that World Rugby owns to support the growth of the game, and not have people reinvent the wheel around those sorts of platforms if they don't need to, and if they want to collaborate and leverage off that, because we don't have to do it all. We don't have to do it 10 times, 12 times over if we're able to leverage the cost base collectively as a game. And World Rugby is here for our members. We are representative of the game, and all the money that we generate goes back to our members and to the sport. So ultimately, if World Rugby prosper and thrive, the game is thriving. And that's the aspiration here in Australia for the World Cup. Again, we've got aspirations to hit 500 to 550 million pounds of surplus for the sport. But we have lofty ambition for what could happen in the US, and which is why, that plan to embed and connect everyone about that is really important, that we get that connection this year to enable us to get going for the runway that's ahead of us.
So tell us a little bit more about the USA. Certainly so far on Rugby Unity, our eyes have been drawn to North America really through the performance and the scale of, the North American market. And when you consider that 40 cents in every dollar that is spent in sports marketing is originated out of the USA or US, American-based companies, it's a gigantic market. How do we take advantage of it? Do we have enough runway to 31 and 33 to realise, a real impact?
I'm really confident we do, and I think there's some early signals that we should be staying close to. Ultimately, it's about building a long-term collective plan, which I've described. But New Zealand are playing Ireland in Chicago this year. Once they announced that earlier this year, it was sold out within a week. Their average ticket price was close to $300 US per ticket.
Wow.
Mark Robinson describes they generate 6 times more US dollars per fan by taking a game to the US than they do to Eden Park. So, because as you understand, that the way that Americans consume sport is very different to the way we may and New Zealanders may. So the commercial opportunities, there's some little signals there that are quite powerful. And if we were to build a collective plan about taking content, big test matches there, we've got 15 test matches in the US this year that we've coordinated with major unions. We had 12,000 fans turn up for a Canadian-USA women's game in Kansas recently that had 2,000 people waiting outside. There are lots of little signals, but we have to do it in a coordinated way. And I guess what we're doing already, so World Rugby as a part of its planning process has already looked at over 40 venues in the US that we believe we could take matches to. We're already starting to bring together our thoughts about the key venues and our preferred venues in terms of playing, but also the commercial reality of where they may be. And also, what does that mean in terms of the markets that we want to grow and exploit, and where are rugby markets more likely to be grown in and already have opportunistic fan bases versus others. So this collective planning of content so rather than New Zealand and Ireland independently making those sorts of decisions, that they would make a plan with us as to where they may take future test matches. Is there an opportunity for Bledisloe Cup to be taken away to the US? So they're the sorts of detailed conversations we're having. And I guess that I see the signals already there commercially in terms of this being a massive opportunity commercially for World Rugby in terms of the delivery of a World Cup. The other important piece of this, though, is the development of the game and the elevation of the performances of teams. And we want the US and Canadian teams in particular, and the Americas teams in South America participating in deep into the tournaments. And we know from the women's game that the Canadian and the US women's teams are incredibly strong in both 15s and 7s. The Canadian women in the World Cup coming up in September will be up there, if not in the top 4 in the finals.
Maybe third favourite, fourth
at the moment.
Favourite?
Yeah. So the US women might be sort of 5 or 6, and they were out here, as we know, playing in Canberra not so long ago, and they were both medalists in Paris, and they're going to go to LA So it'll be an LA Olympics in the 28, and we were at that venue earlier this year where they'll be competing. So I think the women's game, there's a different path to high performance outcomes, and I guess the real challenge is to try and do something significant if we are able to with the Canadian and the US men's teams to try and lift their penetration into the tournament and participation of the sport. But we do see there are separate issues. There's the high performance outcomes, and then there's the commercial outcomes of the World Cup, and they are connected, but they can be independently considered.
But what sits then underneath that also is the actual community-based game over there. It's had a challenging or a challenged past in many ways. You've got the game as it's played in colleges, and there's large numbers of people who've played.
Which is the huge opportunity. College rugby is a pathway, absolutely.
Gigantic. And then obviously the nascent, Major League Rugby tournament, which is sort of rolling along. It's now in its professional rugby. It's in its next iteration. Again, they've had some challenges in the past. Are you confident that USA Rugby can get the underpinnings foundation so that it's not this exercise is not just the cherry on top of the cake, that we actually get the cake fixed up so as that, when we think about, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years' time, that rugby grows into a substantial sport in North America.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a sort of a separate pillar. Again, there's the delivery of the tournament. It's supporting the US teams penetrating high into the tournament. And then it's the legacy of and governance of the game in the US and the growth of the game into their school systems and club systems and their university systems. And that there are challenges as to how that happens and how you have access relative to other sports. But like anything, you sort of got to go back to challenges and naysayers about taking the World Cup to Japan. And you only have to go back to sort of mid to late 2000s when people were absolutely death riding. Why would you do that? And, here we are, looking back on that World Cup as what an amazing event, what an amazing impact it had on the game, on participation, on the rugby culture. And Japan is now the third biggest rugby economy in the world. And so, again, it's a bit to our earlier conversation about having the courage to and the conviction to elevate yourself and take lofty ambition within reason and balance about delivery and capability, but actually because rugby markets around the world in some of the mature markets haven't got a lot more growth potential left in them. There is opportunity clearly, but in terms of the big markets to grow and particularly the economics of the game, we'd look back and kill ourselves for not having a red hot crack at North America.
Oh, of course. I totally agree. Yeah. I do think it's a courageous decision. I think that there are risks about it, and if you have a look at the FIFA Club World Cup that's on at the moment, I think FIFA probably got it a bit wrong in terms of their planning.
Yeah.
And didn't quite get the crowds. Certainly haven't got the revenues that they were looking for. Haven't got the attention so far. Maybe at the sharper end, it's going to work. But it's sort of a cautionary tale that you don't think you're just going to walk into North America and, the money's going to turn on.
No.
You've got to work hard, to get your basics right, so as that when you do look to deliver those big tournaments, that you've done the work and you've been very respectful to those markets, because as you said, it's a very different place.
Yeah, and look, it's not to say that that's the only part of the world that's a focus of ours as well.
But I think it needs to be a big focus.
Yeah, it does.
Really, I think it does.
Yeah.
But also equally, I was just as excited about the Indian tournament, the Premier League tournament over there, and watched a bit of it on YouTube. And I'm looking forward to getting the chairman of Indian Rugby, who led that innovation and well supported again by World Rugby, to find the window, just to find out how it went from his point of view, whether it measured up to expectations. Have you had any feedback as to? I
have watched a bit of it myself, and I haven't had any direct feedback. I mean, the beauty of that was, again, in partnership with the member union, with World Rugby, with the Sevens ecosystem, we said, look, go for it. We'll create the space if you work with us. We spoke to coaches and players about it, and they said what a wonderful addition to the game. And ultimately, it's promoting the sport in a market that is massive, and it's also developing players from India. So there are
that was great. I love that idea.
Yeah, there are players that are running alongside some of the best sevens players in the world, being coached by some of the best players in the world. And ultimately, as we know, like the fastest way to improving high performance outcomes is to be playing with and against the best. And when you do that, you elevate your expectation, you get out of your fishbowl, and suddenly you realise where you need to be. And giving athletes access to that is the single biggest opportunity. And so that's why it was a really great thing to support, and something that, again, allows us to innovate as well, because that they were trialling things, there were technology and broadcast things that they were trialling, and they were experimenting with the shape of the sevens game, the number of minutes in a half and how halves are cut up, and numbers of reserves. So I think there's a lot for us, again, to allow innovation and change through pilot processes like that.
Big news last weekend also that Hong Kong, China have now qualified through the Asian pool to Rugby World Cup. So Hong Kong, China, that sounds big as another big opportunity for the game to grow in that part of the world.
Yeah, I mean, it was a massive decision for World Rugby in 2023 to expand to 24 teams for here in Australia, to bring another 4 teams into the tournament. And I guess that's, a wonderful signal and symbol of the growth of the game, and that we truly are aspiring to grow the footprint across the world and to have those 4 spots available. We currently are in that process now of finalisation of all the 12 qualifiers for the tournament, where we will, by Christmas time, be clear about who's in and who's out, and tickets will go on sale for Australia in early the new year for 2027, where we're going to have, for the first time, a round of 16 ahead of a quarter-final series, which is, again, something different for the sport. And again, to have Hong Kong, China, another Asian country playing is another symbol, I guess, of the opportunity for young footballers in that part of the world to say, I can go to an Olympic Games as a sevens player, or to a Rugby World Cup in Australia as a 15s player. And it goes back to the conversation we've had about lifting and elevating ourselves as to what's possible, and to change lives through this rugby game, because people believe that one day I could be playing for my country in a World Cup. Pretty powerful, mate.
It's very powerful.
As the Brumbies did here in Canberra when we established ourselves, and you could say, I can be a Canberran that plays for the Brumbies that becomes a Wallaby captain. And I think there's been 5 or 6 Wallaby captains come out of Canberra.
So in terms then of some of the challenged areas, World Rugby's remit sort of extends to a certain point, but national unions also have their responsibilities around, the competitions that they're running, and clearly, the financial performance of a number of national unions over a reasonably, extended period of time hasn't been good, which is why your number one priority is around financial sustainability. But what can World Rugby do around, say, the performance or the financial performances around, say, Super Rugby and the Premiership and the URC and other things? Or is that something that sort of is beyond your remit, and you just have to sort of look on and see what's happening? Because that underperformance, has created some risk and some tension. And I do want to ask you in a minute about R360 and what your view is. But, that underperformance, because what I don't like about it is that this sort of introduction of this artificial body into the game at this time, it's not the right time for it, because I think there is so much that is going well and improving that we need to stick to the plan. But just probably to roll back to that first question I asked about how can and what can World Rugby do to reach down into that sort of professional tier in those national unions and those national competitions to ensure that they are not such a drain on the national unions? Because we see, just at the weekend again, every game, every test match that I watched over the weekend was packed. It was packed in Pretoria. It was packed in La Plata. It was packed in Newcastle. It was packed in Dunedin. So that international game, seems to be healthy, and we'll come to it probably not during this conversation, but later, about how can we innovate around those games to generate more revenue lines. But just getting back to that sort of that drain of those competitions where we're probably not performing as we need to, which is creating opportunity for opportunists to come in and take advantage.
Yeah. Look, I think there's no doubt it's the single biggest issue facing the game is the health and well-being of the professional leagues. Because, as you've said, the international game couldn't be stronger, thriving, growing, audiences, excitement. The changes to the shape of the game in the last 12 months have seen significant ball in play time. Fans are happier, broadcasters are happier. But that is the single biggest issue leading to some of those challenges that we have. So when we got together in the May Council, we spent... And look, World Rugby's role is, as I said earlier, we've got to be really clear about what we do and what we don't do. And that's it's not our role to run professional leagues. That's not our job. Our role is to set regulations, global calendar, run these major iconic events, to fuel the game through investing in particular elements and safety and welfare. But we can lead in this space. So one of the big chunks of work that we did for that May meeting was to do some work looking at the drivers around the financial sustainability that unions should consider and minimum standards they might consider about revenue to cost base and put some protections in place. So we offered some thoughts to the game, and as a next step out of that, we're looking to go to the September meeting for World Rugby to provide some regulatory frameworks or minimum standards that unions could consider. But ultimately, it's their choice. This is the thing. We're not running their businesses for them, and the member unions themselves have to manage what is the pathway or the platform system that's going to make it work for them to be sustainable, and that's going to be different around the world.
Yes.
And there are things that have changed over time that mean it is going to be different. And but you can't, you've got to face reality as it is. And, I think we have to actually open our eyes up and make sure we're really staring into these challenges and deal with them together. And they're all of our challenges. It's not, I deeply wear the challenges of the game at that level and would love to do all I possibly can to support. But ultimately, the decisions and the decision rights of that don't sit with me or World Rugby.
So I do want to ask you about the TMO, because that is something that you do have some responsibility for. But just a quick one on R360. Listeners to Rugby Unity are probably...
I've been hearing it, Pember, you're on it.
A dog with a bone, won't drop it. And look, again, what's World Rugby's view about something like the vandals of R360?
Yeah, well, I've got to be a bit careful with my words than you, Pemby, on that. I mean, look, we certainly have a role to play in the the approval processes of competitions, and so member unions come to us with a competition model. There are certain minimum standards of expectation around regulations that they have to live within. And there are the global competitions that they sit within. And we certainly have been providing that group with insight into what are those things that they have to consider. And there's a lot for them to think about because it's a big, complex landscape that they're navigating across, including the international windows and access to international players and regulation.
And we don't know yet. All we've seen is what they've leaked to the newspapers. So we don't. You perhaps know more than the rest of us, but that's what we've got so far, is that this travelling Formula One circus thing that's going to fly around the world and do whatever.
Yeah, well, I mean, we certainly are providing them with context about what's it mean to think about new competitions, which we have done around the world over many years. It's just that there are clear expectations about players being available to play for their country, and the regulations around that are across the windows, and then also areas about player welfare and expectation about player load and all those safety and welfare issues that we are, providing for context for them.
Okay. Well, we'll leave it at that for the moment, because I am waiting for we're all waiting for the details. There's some weeks now. Apparently we're going to get told it sometime soon. But anyway, I was inspired by the Venetians who wanted to ruin Jeff Bezos's wedding. So let's see what they're going to turn up with. And we'll see what we can do, because I am going to do everything in my power to knock it over if I think it is what it is, because I I am so committed to the clubs, the premiership clubs, the top 14 clubs, the URC clubs, the Super Rugby clubs. There is just too much to lose, in my opinion. And we need to work with our traditions and our heritage, and we need to join the game up. So something I was thinking about the other day, and today here in Canberra, we'll be promoting an international membership for the Brumbies. So, if you're a British and Irish Lions fan, you can become a member of the Brumbies.
Yeah.
And I am hoping that Northampton are going to be able to offer something like that, because I've decided that that's going to be my team in the north.
Yeah.
Love Pollock. I think he's fantastic.
Yeah.
I love Mitchell. I think they're great. I think their history is they come to the Cobblers, and I'm sort of like, okay, they're my guys. So I want to have a team in the north, and I hope that we can have these international memberships. And interestingly, the Premier League does it brilliantly. Like Arsenal has more members in North America than they do in the UK.
Yeah.
They've done it really well.
Yeah.
And these are the sorts of innovations that we need to do with our existing structures, with our existing teams.
I think, Pemby, you've got to be really respectful of the foundations of the sport. So all of us have come through a system where we played the game at school and with our clubs, and then that fed into a geographic province that then would allow players to go through and play for their state or their province, that then ultimately allows them to go there. And all of that is deeply interconnected, and the funding and the support and the network. And you've got to be very, very respectful of fracturing that. And so I think it's important, because without that, we don't have a game.
No.
We don't have the pyramid of support, the values coming through, and all those things we've been talking about. So I think we have, we're custodians of this great sport of ours, and we've got to be very careful about fracturing some of the fundamentals that mean that there may be no future pathway. There may not be a young group of men playing in Northern Italy at the moment for the Junior World Cup. And all those boys have come through that system around the world, and it's the mothers and fathers and the coaches that have done that since they were 7 that do it because they love and care of our sport and they connect with the values of our sport. If you lose those people, we don't have a game.
Precisely. Anyway, we'll leave it at that. But one quick one before you go, the TMO. I think at the moment, particularly maybe it's the first round of the international season where we didn't quite get it right, but really, the place is lit up that things aren't quite working as they need to, because our great game, where we've made these big changes and all the rest of it, it's clunky. It feels like we've got sand in the gears at the moment, and we're not quite realising the potential that we do have.
Yeah, I think that there's always, unfortunately, this sort of transitional timing of the provincial competitions in the south handing into the international windows, and the SANZAR and Super Rugby referees and broadcasters working quite cohesively about how we deliver the product. And then when we step into the international game, there's a change of that relationship, which, again, all of us would sit back and look at the weekend and say, we can probably get it better. And so I know the referees have met to review after the weekend. I know that they've considered, what was working and what wasn't. A great sort of comment that was coming out over the last few days from the team: if it's grey, stay away. If we're not certain about it, let's leave it alone, because the referee on the field is the one that we really want. So ultimately, the referee on the field is the manager of all the assets to make a decision, and it's that person that we need to be feeding into, and they are empowered to make decisions with the support of their resources. And what we have to avoid is the resources overwhelming the person in the middle.
Yeah.
And I know that our teams know that. We've got some wonderful referees in this great game of ours who work incredibly hard, and we have to respect them, as respect is a rugby value, and know that, in life we're never going to get everything perfect, and perfection is what we chase all the time. And can we be perfect? Well, maybe we can't be. We've got to be as best we can, but we'll never be perfect. And when we're not, we have to respect, through our values, the flaws in the game. But there's no doubt that the team realise that they could do better, and they're working hard on it.
All right, Robbo. Well, listen, we could talk all night, as we have done for the last 30 years. And I look forward to many, many more conversations into the future, particularly as we work towards the release of the strategic plan and the various elements of the growth strategy later in the year, because, again, that's the mission of Rugby Unity, is to help secure the future prosperity of rugby union around the world, lining up around that strategic agenda and understanding what's in that strategic agenda, and then pursuing conversations, relationships, networks, ideas that can help to grow that. So hopefully to be a forum for progress around the sport, because that's the thing to me, is that we have this golden period that is sitting in front of us. And if we do work hard under your leadership, I think we can make great progress, and we will make great progress. So anyway, it's an exciting time to be making a podcast, and I'm sure it's an exciting time to be the chairman of World Rugby.
It is, mate. And I guess we kicked off this conversation about the power of a plan being owned by everyone and delivered. From our great man Rod and Eddie in those early days. There's nothing different.
No.
Now, this is a plan being built by the game, for the game, to hold no one back and leave no one behind.
And I'm sure rugby fans around the world want to get involved.
Yeah.
And I think this is something that perhaps previously World Rugby hasn't done very well, is bring everybody with them. Educate everybody about this is what the plan is, this is what we are trying to do.
Yeah.
Maybe this is the first time that we do have this cohesive strategic plan, but I do know that people will be very interested, they'll be very engaged, they'll have very strong opinions about it, and we can work together. We can, let's collaborate as best as we can, and then let's compete. Let's really play some great rugby and have a great time. So anyway, we will, as I say, we could talk forever. Congratulations again.
Thanks, mate. Lovely
very
to see
proud.
you.
Yep, very proud of you. And
love all my best to the Eddie Beaver as well. I'm sorry he's not here, but pass on my best.
Oh, we could tell some stories.
Absolutely, we could. Maybe that's another podcast.
Well, that may be after you. Another time. Anyway, listen, Robbo, thanks for coming in and sharing giving up some of your valuable time, and thanks to you, the audience, for coming back once again. Listen, thank you so much for all of the responses so far. Thanks for all of you on TikTok who are giving me a hard time, which is fine. Really enjoying that engagement, but please keep the questions coming. We talk about the third voice here at Rugby Unity because that's what we want to hear, because if you can come through to us, we can be a gateway and a pathway through into the leadership of the organisation, who are all ears. As you can hear from Brett Robinson, he wants to know what people think. They want to know. Alan Gilpin wants to know. The rest of the leadership at World Rugby want to know. So keep the questions coming. Keep asking us, and we'd like to hear from you as much as we possibly can. If you would like to all of our content, but please, subscribing. That is really important to us as well, because we want to continue to grow our audience. So anyway, a very big thanks again for Brett Robinson, Dr. Brett Robinson, coming into the studio. Thanks very much for joining me again. My name is David Pembroke. Please be kind to each other, and it's bye for now.